Hello everyone and welcome back to Mad Art. If you thought we were done exposing the underbelly of power after our last video, well, you clearly underestimate the depth of the rabbit hole. We're back for part 2 of our series on the most corrupt African presidents, because unfortunately the list is long and the stories are just too important not to tell. These aren't just headlines. These are tales of immense wealth being siphoned away from the people who need it most, citizens who were promised progress, prosperity, and a brighter future, only to have those promises broken by the very leaders they trusted. Today we're diving even deeper into the mechanics of grand-scale corruption. We'll be looking at leaders who treated their national treasuries like personal piggy banks, who appointed family members to powerful positions as if they were just handing out party favors, and whose actions not only stalled their country's development but actively reversed it. It's a story about greed, impunity, and the staggering betrayal of public trust. The sheer audacity of some of these schemes is something you have to see to believe. So, grab your seat, because we're about to pull back the curtain on another 10 figures who mastered the art of the steal. This isn't just about pointing fingers, it's about understanding the patterns, recognizing the warning signs, and ultimately, honoring the resilience of the people who continue to fight for accountability and justice in the face of overwhelming odds. Let's get into it, because the truth, as they say, will set you free. But first, it's going to make you very, very angry. Our journey begins in Zimbabwe with a name that echoes through modern African history: Robert Mugabe. Now this is a complicated one. Mugabe started as a celebrated liberation hero, a revolutionary who fought against white minority rule and brought independence to his people in 1980. For a time he was hailed as a Pan-African icon, a symbol of hope and self-determination. He championed education and healthcare, and in the early years, Zimbabwe looked like a genuine success story, a beacon for the continent. But as we've seen time and time again, the path from hero to villain can be a short and slippery one. The transformation didn't happen overnight, it was a slow, creeping decay of democratic principles. Power, it seems, is an intoxicating substance, and Mugabe drank deeply from that cup for nearly 4 decades. What began as a promising tenure slowly morphed into an authoritarian regime characterized by political intimidation, election rigging, and the violent suppression of any and all opposition. The state's security forces became his personal enforcers, and the line between the ruling party, ZANU-PF, and the state itself blurred until it was non-existent. Dissent was not tolerated, it was crushed. The real economic nosedive began in the late 1990s and early 2000s with the controversial land reform program. While the idea of redistributing land from a small minority of white farmers to the landless black majority was noble in principle, the execution was catastrophic. It was chaotic, often violent, and politically motivated, with prime farms being handed over not to skilled agriculturalists, but to his political cronies and loyalists who had no idea how to run them. This move crippled Zimbabwe's agricultural sector, once known as the breadbasket of Africa, and sent the economy into a freefall from which it has never fully recovered. Then there was the personal enrichment, the bling factor. While the Zimbabwean people were grappling with hyperinflation so severe that the government was printing $100 trillion bills that couldn't even buy a loaf of bread, the Mugabe family was living a life of obscene luxury. His wife, Grace Mugabe, earned the nickname Gucci Grace for her extravagant international shopping sprees, buying up designer shoes, jewelry, and lavish properties around the world. Reports estimated Mugabe's personal fortune to be over $1 billion, stashed away in foreign accounts while his people starved. The impact was devastating and total. A once prosperous nation was brought to its knees. The healthcare system collapsed, life expectancy plummeted, and millions of Zimbabweans fled the country, creating a massive diaspora. Mugabe's rule is a textbook example of how a leader's corruption and lust for power can destroy a nation's potential. He clung to power until 2017, when he was finally ousted in a military coup at the age of 93, leaving behind a legacy not of liberation but of ruin, a tragic final chapter for a man who once promised so much. Next, we travel to the small, oil-rich nation of Equatorial Guinea, ruled by Africa's longest-serving dictator Teodoro Obiang Nguema Mbasogo. He seized power from his own uncle in a bloody coup in 1979 and has been in charge ever since. To understand the scale of corruption here, you have to understand the country's wealth. In the mid-1990s, massive offshore oil reserves were discovered, turning Equatorial Guinea into one of sub-Saharan Africa's biggest oil producers overnight. Per capita, it's one of the wealthiest countries on the continent. But you wouldn't know it by looking at the lives of its citizens. This immense oil wealth, which should have transformed the nation into a paradise, has instead been treated as the personal bank account of the Obiang family. The money flows directly to the ruling elite, bypassing the populace entirely. While the vast majority of citizens live in abject poverty, lacking access to clean water, basic sanitation, healthcare, or reliable electricity, President Obiang and his family live like royalty. The disconnect between the country's GDP and its Human Development Index is one of the largest in the world, a clear sign that the money is not reaching the people. The most infamous example of this family's opulence is the president's son, Teodoro Obiang. He was appointed vice president by his father, and his lifestyle is the stuff of legend, or rather, a prosecutor's dream. He has a fleet of supercars including Bugattis and Lamborghinis, a private jet, a multi-million-dollar mansion in Malibu, and even Michael Jackson's crystal-encrusted glove. All of this was funded by money allegedly embezzled and extorted from the state. International authorities have been chasing him for years, seizing his assets in France, Switzerland, and the United States. International bodies and human rights organizations have repeatedly condemned the regime. U.S. Justice Department investigations have detailed how Obiang and his inner circle systematically siphoned off hundreds of millions of dollars. French courts convicted his son Teodoro in absentia for embezzlement. Yet despite these international condemnations and asset seizures, Obiang remains firmly in power. The state's resources are used to maintain a powerful security apparatus that brutally suppresses any form of dissent, ensuring the family's grip on power remains absolute. The tragedy of Equatorial Guinea is that its poverty is entirely man-made. It's a classic case of the resource curse, where a country's natural wealth becomes a tool for entrenching a corrupt authoritarian regime rather than uplifting its people. The nation's potential has been squandered, its future mortgaged for super yachts and Parisian mansions. For over 40 years, one family has plundered a nation's entire fortune, leaving its people with nothing but the bitter irony of being poor in a land of unimaginable riches. We now turn to Sudan and its former strongman, Omar al-Bashir, whose 30-year rule was a masterclass in brutality and corruption. Al-Bashir came to power in a military coup in 1989 and quickly established a repressive Islamist regime. His time in office was defined by near-constant civil war, political oppression, and a devastating conflict in the Darfur region that the international community has labeled a genocide. But alongside this legacy of violence was a parallel story of systematic looting of the state's resources. Al-Bashir oversaw a patronage network that was deeply embedded in the country's economy. Key sectors from oil and gold to telecommunications and agriculture were controlled by a small circle of his loyalists, high-ranking military officials, and members of his political party. This elite group used their positions to enrich themselves through kickbacks, rigged contracts, and the outright theft of state assets. The country's oil revenues, which should have been used for development, were largely diverted to fund the military and security services that kept him in power, and to line the pockets of his cronies. The scandals surrounding al-Bashir are numerous and staggering. One of the most telling moments came after he was overthrown in 2019. Investigators raided his residence and found suitcases stuffed with cash in multiple currencies, euros, US dollars, and Sudanese pounds, totaling over $130 million. When questioned, al-Bashir claimed the money was a donation from Saudi Arabia, a defense that was as audacious as it was unbelievable. This was likely just the tip of the iceberg, a small fraction of a fortune believed to be worth billions, hidden in accounts and assets across the globe. His corruption had a profound effect on the political landscape, creating a system where loyalty was bought and paid for. The state was effectively hollowed out, with institutions designed not to serve the public, but to facilitate plunder. This kleptocracy fueled the very conflicts that defined his rule. The marginalization and economic neglect of regions like Darfur, the Blue Nile, and South Kordofan were direct consequences of a system that concentrated all wealth and power in the hands of a corrupt elite in Khartoum. The wars were not just about ethnicity or religion, they were about control over resources. Eventually, the Sudanese people had enough. Decades of economic mismanagement, soaring inflation, and repression culminated in a massive popular uprising in late 2018 and 2019. Millions took to the streets demanding his removal. The military, seeing the writing on the wall, finally turned on him and placed him under arrest. Omar al-Bashir, the first sitting head of state to be indicted by the International Criminal Court for genocide and war crimes, was ultimately brought down by his own people, tired of living under the thumb of a regime that stole both their wealth and their future. Our next case takes us to Angola, a nation blessed with vast oil and diamond reserves, but cursed for 38 years by the rule of José Eduardo dos Santos. Unlike some of the more flamboyant dictators, dos Santos cultivated an image of a quiet, reserved statesman. But behind this unassuming facade was one of the most sophisticated and systemic operations of state capture on the continent. He presided over a system that funneled billions of dollars from Angola's oil wealth into the hands of his family and a tight-knit group of political and military elites. Under dos Santos, corruption was not a bug in the system, it was the system. The state oil company, Sonangol, was the primary vehicle for this plunder. For years, billions of dollars in oil revenue went missing from the national accounts, unaccounted for and untraceable. This wealth was used to create a powerful oligarchy completely loyal to the president. Key government contracts, licenses and business opportunities were handed out to those in his inner circle, ensuring their loyalty and creating a class of ultra-rich Angolans while the majority of the population languished in poverty. The most prominent beneficiary of this system was his own daughter, Isabel dos Santos. Her father appointed her head of the state oil company, Sonangol, putting her in direct control of the nation's primary source of income. Through a web of shell companies and preferential deals, she built a massive business empire, becoming for a time Africa's richest woman with a fortune estimated at over $2 billion. The Luanda leaks, a massive investigation by journalists, exposed how she had systematically siphoned state funds, secured lucrative contracts and acquired stakes in key Angolan industries, all thanks to presidential decrees signed by her father. The public outcry against this rampant corruption grew over the years, though it was often brutally suppressed. Activists and journalists who dared to expose the regime's dealings faced intimidation, arrest, and violence. The gap between the gleaming, oil-funded skyscrapers of Luanda and the impoverished slums surrounding them became a stark symbol of the nation's inequality. Despite earning hundreds of billions in oil revenue during his tenure, Angola's infrastructure, healthcare and education systems remained in a deplorable state. After stepping down in 2017, his hand-picked successor, João Lourenço, surprisingly launched an anti-corruption campaign, much of which targeted the dos Santos family's assets. Isabel dos Santos had her assets frozen, and now faces corruption charges in Angola and Portugal. It was a stunning reversal of fortune that laid bare the sheer scale of the family's plunder. The story of dos Santos is a sobering reminder that even the quietest leaders can preside over the loudest theft, leaving a legacy of stolen opportunities for an entire generation. Prepare for a descent into the bizarre as we head to the Gambia, ruled for 22 years by the eccentric and brutal dictator Yahya Jammeh. He seized power in a 1994 coup as a young army lieutenant and quickly established one of the most repressive and peculiar regimes in Africa. Jammeh was a man of wild proclamations and paranoia. He claimed to have developed a herbal cure for HIV and AIDS, which involved potions and bananas, declared he would rule for 1 billion years, and demanded to be addressed as His Excellency Sheikh Professor Al-Haji Dr. Yahya Ajj Jammeh Babili Mansa. Behind this bizarre public persona was a man with an insatiable appetite for wealth and power. Jammeh treated the Gambia's state coffers as his personal slush fund. An investigation by the Organized Crime and Corruption Reporting Project, or OCCRP, revealed that he and his associates systematically stole at least $975 million from the tiny West African nation. This is a staggering amount for a country with one of the smallest economies in the world. He plundered the state pension fund, stole funds from the National Telecommunications Company, and diverted money from the central bank. The methods were brazen. Jammeh would have soldiers walk into the central bank and withdraw millions in cash with no explanation. He controlled a network of businesses, including a cattle ranch and a bakery, that were funded with stolen public money. He used the state-owned telecom company Gamtel to secure international loans that were then funneled into his private accounts. While Gambians struggled with poverty and unemployment, Jammeh was flying in Lebanese businessmen on his private jet, and living a life of unimaginable luxury, complete with a fleet of Rolls-Royces and a sprawling estate. The economic consequences were severe. The systematic theft of public funds starved essential services of a desperately poor country. Hospitals lacked basic medicines, schools were underfunded, and infrastructure crumbled. Jammeh's unpredictable and often irrational policies also scared off foreign investors, further damaging the economy. His reign of terror, enforced by his notorious intelligence agency, the NIA, and a paramilitary death squad known as the Junglers, created a climate of fear that silenced any opposition and allowed his looting to continue unchecked for over 2 decades. Jammeh's rule came to a surprising end in 2016 when he lost a presidential election to Adama Barrow, and after initially refusing to step down, was forced into exile by regional military intervention. He fled to Equatorial Guinea, but not before allegedly making one last trip to the central bank, loading a cargo plane with luxury cars and cash. The new government has since been working to untangle his web of corruption and recover the stolen assets, a monumental task that reveals the true, devastating scale of his kleptocracy. Our next stop is South Africa, a country whose democratic ideals were severely tested by the presidency of Jacob Zuma. His tenure from 2009 to 2018 was plagued by an almost constant stream of corruption allegations, legal battles and scandals that eroded public trust in the ruling African National Congress, or ANC, the party of Nelson Mandela. Zuma, a charismatic populist with deep roots in the anti-apartheid struggle, came to power promising to serve the people, but his presidency became synonymous with the concept of state capture. The most infamous scandal of his presidency involves his relationship with the Gupta family, a wealthy business family of Indian origin. A series of investigations and whistleblower testimonies revealed that the Guptas had cultivated a corrupt relationship with Zuma and his son, Duduzan. They were accused of influencing cabinet appointments, steering lucrative state contracts to their own companies, and effectively running a shadow government. This phenomenon, known as state capture, saw key state-owned enterprises like the power utility Eskom and the rail agency Transnet being systematically plundered for the benefit of the Guptas and their associates. Another major scandal was the issue of his private homestead in Nkandla. Millions of dollars of public money were used for security upgrades to his rural home, which included a swimming pool, dubbed a fire pool, a cattle enclosure, an amphitheater, and a visitors center. When the public protector found that Zuma had unduly benefited from these upgrades, and ordered him to pay back a portion of the money, he defied the ruling for years. The scandal became a potent symbol of the president's disregard for accountability and the law, leading to the Constitutional Court finding that he had failed to uphold the Constitution. The bribery incidents and kickbacks date back even before his presidency. Zuma was dogged by hundreds of corruption charges related to a 1990s arms deal, where he was accused of taking bribes from a French arms company. These charges were controversially dropped just before he became president, but they have haunted him ever since, leading to years of legal wrangling to have them reinstated. The sheer volume and persistence of these allegations created a climate of impunity, suggesting that the president was above the law. The loss of public trust was immense. The ANC, once revered as a liberation movement, became seen as a vehicle for personal enrichment. The economy stagnated, credit ratings were downgraded, and mass protests demanding his resignation became a regular feature of South African life. Eventually, the pressure from within his own party became too great, and the ANC forced him to resign in February 2018 to avoid a vote of no confidence in parliament. Zuma's presidency serves as a cautionary tale about how even the strongest democracies can be undermined by corruption at the highest level. Now we move to the heart of the Sahel, to Chad, a nation that, for 3 decades, was under the iron-fisted rule of Idriss Déby. Déby, a French-trained military officer, seized power in a coup in 1990 and ruled until his death on the battlefield in 2021. His presidency was defined by, well, perpetual conflict, both with internal rebel groups and external threats. He positioned himself as a key Western ally in the fight against terrorism in the region, which often allowed him to, deflect criticism of his authoritarian rule and rampant corruption at home. Nepotism was not just a feature of Déby's government, it was its organizing principle. Power in Chad was concentrated in the hands of his family and his Zaghawa ethnic group. Key positions in the government, the military, and the state-owned enterprises were filled with his relatives, sons, brothers, and nephews. This created a system where loyalty to the family was paramount, and state institutions were treated almost like family property. The government was less a functioning bureaucracy and more a sprawling network of clan-based patronage. This system had some pretty profound implications for governance. With positions filled based on family ties rather than, say, merit, state institutions became inefficient and unaccountable. The country's significant oil revenues, which began flowing in the early 2000s, were largely absorbed by this ruling clique. A World Bank-backed project to ensure oil money was used for poverty reduction spectacularly failed, as Déby's government changed the laws to divert the funds towards military spending and the enrichment of his inner circle. The promise that oil would lift Chad out of poverty was broken almost immediately. While Déby and his family consolidated their wealth and power, the average Chadian remained among the poorest people on the planet. The country consistently ranks near the bottom of the UN's Human Development Index. Access to basic services like healthcare, education, and clean water is extremely limited. The state's resources were not invested in the people, but in a massive military and security apparatus designed for one purpose: to keep the Déby clan in power and crush any rebellion that threatened their lucrative control over the nation. Upon his death, the unconstitutionality of his regime was laid bare when a military council, led by his own son, Mohammed Kaka Déby Itno, immediately seized power, dissolving parliament and promising an 18-month transition that has since been extended. The transfer of power from father to son cemented the family's dynastic rule and showed that, for the Déby clan, Chad was not a country to be governed, but an inheritance to be claimed. It was the ultimate act of nepotism, ensuring the corrupt system he built would long outlive him. We now head to the Republic of the Congo, also known as Congo-Brazzaville, a nation that has been dominated for most of the past 4 decades by one man, Denis Sassou Nguesso. He first ruled from 1979 to 1992, then returned to power in 1997 after a bloody civil war, and has remained there ever since. Like many of his counterparts on this list, Sassou Nguesso has presided over an oil-rich nation, while its population remains mired in deep poverty, a paradox explained by decades of systematic fraud and embezzlement. The fraud accusations against Sassou Nguesso and his family are vast and well documented by international investigators and NGOs. The primary source of the country's wealth, the state-owned oil company SNPC, has been described as a slush fund for the presidential family. Investigations such as the one dubbed biens mal acquis, or ill-gotten gains in France, have painstakingly detailed how billions of dollars in oil revenues have been diverted through opaque sales of crude oil, inflated contracts, and a web of offshore companies controlled by the president's relatives and close associates. Subsequent investigations have uncovered a lifestyle of staggering opulence funded by this stolen wealth. Members of the presidential family have been found to own fleets of luxury cars and dozens of high-end properties in Paris and other expensive European locations. The president's son, Denis Christel Sassou Nguesso, nicknamed Kiki the Oil Man, has been at the center of many of these investigations, accused of laundering millions of dollars of embezzled public funds through a network of shell companies to fund his extravagant spending habits. The public outcry within Congo-Brazzaville has been consistently and brutally suppressed. The regime maintains a tight grip on power through control of the security forces, intimidation of the media, and the jailing of political opponents. When the constitution was changed in 2015 to allow Sassou Nguesso to run for yet another term, the protests that erupted were met with a violent crackdown. The government ensures that any voice of dissent is silenced, allowing the plundering of the nation's resources to continue without any domestic accountability. The consequences for the Congolese people have been dire. Despite its oil wealth, the country is crippled by enormous public debt, much of it owed to oil traders in opaque deals. The healthcare and education systems are in a state of collapse. In the economic capital of Pointe Noire, where the oil is extracted, many neighborhoods lack basic services like electricity and running water. The story of Denis Sassou Nguesso is one of a leader who has mortgaged his country's future to sustain his family's lavish lifestyle and his own unending grip on power. Our penultimate case takes us to the vast, resource-rich Democratic Republic of Congo, where Joseph Kabila ruled for 18 years after inheriting the presidency from his assassinated father, Laurent Kabila, in 2001. The DRC is arguably one of the wealthiest countries on Earth in terms of natural resources. It has colossal deposits of cobalt, copper, diamonds, gold, and coltan. This immense wealth, however, has been a source of conflict and corruption for decades, a trend that accelerated under Kabila's watch. The primary method of enrichment for Kabila and his family was the systematic looting of the mining sector. A massive investigation known as the Congo Holdup, based on millions of leaked bank documents, revealed the mechanics of this plunder. State-owned mining assets worth billions of dollars were sold off at rock-bottom prices to opaque offshore companies, often secretly controlled by or linked to Kabila's inner circle. These assets were then frequently resold at their true market value, generating enormous profits for a select few while depriving the state of desperately needed revenue. Money laundering was central to the Kabila system. The leaked bank records showed how a commercial bank, BGFI Bank, became a key vehicle for the presidential family. Hundreds of millions of dollars of public funds were funneled through this bank into accounts controlled by Kabila's relatives and business partners. This money was then used to buy up assets across the country and abroad, creating a sprawling business empire for the Kabila family that spanned everything from banking and farming to construction and aviation. The legal proceedings and international scrutiny have been slow but steady. The Congo holdup investigation provided concrete evidence, leading to sanctions against some of the key players in Kabila's network by the United States and other international bodies. These revelations confirmed what many Congolese people had long suspected, that the president and his family were systematically enriching themselves at the expense of the nation. While Kabila himself has so far avoided direct legal consequences, the evidence has permanently tarnished his legacy. The impact of this grand-scale corruption on the DRC cannot be overstated. It is a country where, despite its mineral wealth, the majority of the population lives on less than $2 a day. The east of the country remains plagued by conflict, often fueled by the struggle to control mineral resources. Infrastructure is virtually non-existent in many areas, and the healthcare and education systems are in a state of perpetual crisis. Joseph Kabila's rule represents a colossal missed opportunity, a period where the country's immense potential was siphoned off to build a family dynasty, rather than a prosperous nation. For our final and perhaps most infamous example, we go to Nigeria to examine the regime of General Sani Abacha. Abacha seized power in a 1993 military coup and ruled with an iron fist until his sudden death in 1998. His 5-year reign is not remembered for any political or economic achievements. It is remembered as one of the most kleptocratic periods in modern history. Abacha didn't just skim a little off the top, he orchestrated the wholesale looting of Africa's largest oil producer. The overall corruption during his time was breathtaking in its scale and simplicity. The primary method was straightforward theft from the Central Bank of Nigeria. Abacha would simply tell his national security advisor to make a request for money for national security purposes. Abacha would approve the request, and hundreds of millions of dollars in cash would be withdrawn from the central bank, loaded into trucks, and delivered to the presidential villa. There was no pretense, no complex scheme, just the raw exercise of absolute power to steal public money. The estimates of the amount stolen vary, but most credible sources place the figure between $3 billion and $5 billion. This money was then laundered through a global network of bank accounts in the UK, Switzerland, Luxembourg, and the United States. The Abacha family and their associates used front companies and complex financial instruments to hide the money, buying up property and living lavishly while Nigeria's economy and infrastructure crumbled under international sanctions and gross mismanagement. The impact on the nation was catastrophic. Nigeria's oil wealth, which should have funded development, was treated as Abacha's personal fortune. The country's foreign reserves were decimated, public services collapsed, and Nigeria's international reputation was left in tatters. His regime was also incredibly brutal, characterized by the jailing of political opponents, the assassination of activists like Ken Saro-Wiwa, and the violent suppression of all dissent. He stole not only Nigeria's money but also its freedom. Since his death, Nigeria has been engaged in a decades-long international effort to recover the Abacha loot. It has been a slow and arduous process, but billions of dollars have been identified and repatriated from various countries. Each repatriation makes headlines and serves as a stark reminder of the sheer scale of his theft. The story of Sani Abacha is the ultimate cautionary tale of military dictatorship and corruption, a raw and undisputed example of a leader who saw his nation as nothing more than a treasure chest to be plundered. And there you have it, 10 more stories. 10 more cautionary tales of power corrupting and absolute power corrupting, well, a whole damn national treasury. It's easy to look at these numbers, billions of dollars, fleets of cars, mansions all over the world, and become numb to it. But we can't. Because behind every stolen billion is a hospital that wasn't built, a school that crumbled, a generation of young people denied the opportunity to reach their potential. This isn't just about bad leaders, it's about the systems that allow them to flourish and the devastating human cost they leave in their wake. But here's the thing, and it's the most important part. The story doesn't end with the theft. It ends with the fight for accountability. In almost every case we discussed, the truth came out. It came out because of brave journalists who risked their lives, activists who wouldn't be silenced, and ordinary citizens who took to the streets and said, "Enough." Change is slow and fighting corruption can feel like a never-ending battle, but these stories prove that it's not impossible. The stolen assets being returned, the leaders being forced from office. These are victories no matter how small they seem. So what's the takeaway? It's that we have to keep paying attention. We have to support the people on the ground doing the hard work, and we have to remember that demanding better from our leaders isn't just a political act, it's a moral one. Because at the end of the day, a nation's wealth belongs to its people. All of its people. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and join the conversation in the comments. We'll see you next time.